everyone, and welcome to our evening with author Catherine Schaff-Stump. We're so excited for our first virtual event of 2020. Welcome, Catherine.
Thanks, Terry. It's good to be here.
Here, yeah, virtually together. Hopefully someday we'll be able to do one of these in person. We were just chatting about that, about all the opportunity that's out there as things hopefully we can gather in large groups again. So we're excited for that to happen soon and hope that we can do that the next book that comes out for you. So just to give everybody a quick little introduction, because with a virtual event, we know we have people from all over the country, if not all over the world, joining us. That's the nice thing about a virtual event, is that people can join us from anywhere at any time. So my name is Terry LeBlanc. I'm one of the co-owners of Swamp Fox Bookstore, which is an independent women-owned bookstore in Marion, Iowa, just on 6th Avenue. We opened in the middle of the pandemic in July of 2020, and we've been going strong since then. We carry a wide range of books, everything from board books for babies on up to all of the books for fiction and nonfiction for adults. And we can special order books as well. And we are proud to support a lot of our independent local authors, such as Catherine. So this evening, we're excited, like I said, to have Catherine Schaff-Stump with us, and she writes fantasy and for children and adults. She writes funny stories, dark stories. This last one's pretty dark, Catherine.
Yeah, it is. Kind of.
And everything in between. She is the author of the Klareon Scrolls series, which we'll be talking about tonight, and the Abigail Wrath Versus series. Kath lives and works in Iowa, and during the day, she teaches English at a local community college. More of her fiction can be has been published by Paper Golem Press, Daydream Dandelion Press, and the Mammoth Book of Diesel Punk. You can find her on Facebook, Goodreads, Amazon. You're on Twitter too.
I'm on Twitter too.
And on Instagram, and her website is cathschaffstump.com. And she's also right now publishing a Kindle series, The Autumn Warrior and the Ice Sword, which you read an excerpt of that at Icon, which is a lot of fun to hear. So welcome. So glad to have you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Great. Well, we're going to start out. What we're going to do, kind of break the evening up. I'm going to ask Kath some questions. She's going to read a little bit from her latest book. We'll jump into more questions. I'm keeping an eye on Facebook as well as our chat here for those that have joined us from their personal links. So if you have questions, you want to chat with us, please drop those in the chat, and we'll keep an eye on try to interact with you there as well. So my first question for you, since you do have a full-time job at the local community college, what is the day in the life of an author like for you? How do you balance it all?
I am a planner. This comes as no surprise to anyone who knows me. So every week I sit down with a big calendar and I actually take a look at the times that I have that are outside of my job. And then I try to block out, if possible, every day, some time to write. A lot of the times, because it will depend on the semester and how my classes have been set up for an individual semester. Like this semester, I will be writing mostly in the evenings. But some semesters I write more in the mornings, right? The point is I just try to get it set up. I try to do some every day. I try to make progress every day, but that's not always possible. Now, some people say, well, is it hard to write with a full-time job? Sure. But I think sometimes the authors who have full-time jobs are more organized and use their times more efficiently. The time that they have is very valuable, so they have to really plan it and work with it. And I know so many authors now don't do this for a full-time gig for a wide variety of reasons. Now, how do I write? What kind of methodology do I use? Kind of depends on what my goals are for the day. Like right now I'm in the middle of putting together an episode of the and working on the words. Revising periods are very different. You can get through a lot more material. And then there are actually some times as a writer where I have to do things like publicity and that kind of stuff, because as an indie writer, you're pretending to be all the things. You're editing, publishing, publicity, all that good stuff. But I try to spend, I'd say, 70% of my time writing, because that's really what you need to do, for sure.
That's awesome. So what inspires you to write the most? Where do you get your ideas? I mentioned and I know from reading your work that you span a wide range of things. You have the dark
Yeah,
stuff, you have the humorous stuff with Abby
yeah,
Wrath, you write short stories that kind of run
yeah.
the gamut. So what inspires you? What
Wow, what a good question. I think that's a question that a lot of writers get kind of asked, and um, so a lot of my friends who read my stuff call my work horror adjacent. I do have a tendency to run sort of with a small horror theme, even in Abby Wrath, which is about horror movies, right? So I guess media to some extent does influence me. But another thing, and I'm not ashamed to admit it, although back in the day it had a stigma, I'm actually actively involved in a role playing group that's been around for 20 some odd years. Members of that group have come and gone, but the core of that group, I've been gaming with them for a very long time. And they help me flesh out my stories in ways that give me ideas for characters, give me ideas for plots that I might not have if I weren't interacting with other people. I try to think of it like improv theater.
mm-hmm.
Yeah. I also hang out with a lot of other writers, and every once in a while we'll say, what if blah happened? And I'll get like a lot of my short story ideas from the what if blah happened.
I know from being at some of your events that does happen, and having, sitting in
Yeah.
the lobby at the Marriott during Icon, that
Oh
I've
yeah,
witnessed
yeah.
that happening.
Right now I'm working on an anthology with a bunch of authors, and it's based on a bunch of like goofy things we said during critique sessions.
Oh.
So we actually all have a tagline we have to write a story about. Mine is Damned Walt Disney. So whatever I come up with for that, the prompt is going to be Damned Walt Disney. So, that's kind of a thing too. Every once in a while you get an assignment or someone has a clever idea and you're like, I could do that.
I
So
can see you
yeah.
having a lot of fun with that one, since I know that you're a huge Disney fan.
Oh yeah. And I'm actually trying to write something really positive and upbeat. I know, right? But it's been a while.
Yeah.
For obvious reasons that we're all thinking about. So yeah, thinking about that.
So when did you know you wanted to be a writer, that writing was a thing that was a passion for you?
Okay, there's a wee bit of a story here. My older brother, about 2 years older than me, is actually kind of an artist. He was the kid in the house that drew, and I always kind of wanted to do that, but I had bad eyes and they didn't catch on until I was about 5. And besides, that was his thing, right? So I was looking for my thing, and he and I were working on a Mother's Day present, and he took a big block of wood and drew on it, and then my younger brother, who's about 2 years younger than me, he decided he would be the guy who would varnish this new exciting cutting board, and they looked at their effort and they said, I think we need a poem on this. And I said, okay, I'll write a poem. And I was 8 years old. And I wrote this poem, and it was, of course, a dreadful, pithy little child's poem. But, we three put it together, and my mother's praise was effusive. And she just thought my poem was like the best thing. The drawing was the best thing, and the cutting board was the best thing. But that was kind of my cue. It's like, oh, I'm good at this. Okay, this will be my thing. And then I just started like writing all sorts of little things, right? I actually sat down to write my first book, my first terribly dreadful, really awful book at the age of 14. And wrote a couple of Lord of the Rings ripoffs like you do when you're...
Well, it's fan fiction. That's where a lot of authors cut their teeth.
Oh yeah, I've done my time in the fan fiction trenches too, right? Yeah, for sure. Both as a youngster and as an oldster. But yes, so it's always kind of been there. When did I actually decide to kind of buckle down and make a good run at it? Well, on and off, but about 2012 is when I finally decided that it was an important part of my life that maybe I would scale back on my college duties and step forward into this role. So
awesome. Great. So you've basically been writing most of your life at some
most of my life. A lot of writers will tell you that, yeah, for sure.
Yes, it's true. I've heard it a lot. It's not uncommon. So your most recent release, the Wrath of Horus, is the third book in the Clarion Scrolls
Yeah,
series.
yeah.
It's a bit darker than the other ones in the series. You even have a
A
little
bit
like
darker, a bit.
you even have a little warning at the beginning of the book.
Yeah, yeah.
So, what was the inspiration for the new novel? And please share a bit of the book with us and about the series for those people that may not be
Yeah.
familiar with it. I'm familiar with it, so
Okay, but I'll do it for everybody who's watching
yeah,
at home, playing the
yes.
home game. Okay, so first I'll tell you a little bit about the series. The Klareon Scrolls series is a gothic series of books which follows 5 generations of a family of binders. They have contracts with Egyptian gods, and they have to fight these gods when they hit the age of 16. If they lose, the god gets to control them and enslave them. If they win, they get to kind of control the gods. And there's all sorts of cosmology underneath this, which is basically about the gods living up to their potential, the Clarions living up to their potential. And, you know, there are a few twists and turns along the way, but that I can't tell you about yet because I haven't written them. But this is this big, you know, giant family saga with dark overtones and deities and stuff. All right, so that's the book series. The first book and second book are about the first generation, and this new book is the first book about the second generation, about the kids of the people we read about in the first 2 books. Now, okay, I started this book in 2019, so lest y'all are thinking, oh my God, it's pandemic brain. It kind of is, but 2019 was actually kind of a dark time in my life. I had some fake heart trouble, but we spent the summer of 2019 wondering if I had a heart problem, and nothing sobers you up a lot as much as thinking, ooh, this might be it. I might get a pacemaker, or this might be, you know, kind of the beginning of the end. So I came out of that okay, but I came out of that in kind of a dark place. And I remember thinking, all right, 2020, I'm going to come back, and I'm going to come back big. All right. And I had started this book, but it was not the dark book that you have in your hands. It was a book about the next generation, and I wasn't sure what was going to happen. And then as I was like thinking about the book, I joined a horror woman's writer group. And well, those guys were dark, let me tell you. But I had one of them was a Dante's Inferno scholar. And it occurred to me that one of the things I could do to these poor people is I could put them in Dante's Inferno and do, because there's an abyss factor in this book, in the first 2 books. And I could run these characters through that scenario. And oh my God, well, you can't send someone to Dante's Inferno without horrible things happening. And then, of course, the world went to crap. And a lot of us were channeling a lot of dark stuff. And so this is the book that came out of a bleak personal life, a bleak world life, and hanging out with people who liked horror too much. Mm-hmm. I don't intend for the book to stay here. The next book will actually be a book about survivors and moving forward, and probably will be, I don't know, dare I say it, a little more upbeat to kind of offset this book. But here is this book full of trauma and really kind of at the same time my love letter to Dante and his most interesting poem. Yeah.
So you want to read a little bit from it for us?
I sure do. So let me tell you what's going on in the section that I'm going to read. So our group of characters have ended up in Dante's Inferno through some machinations. There are a couple of the characters who really do not get along, and they set all of the events into motion. And so the characters end up in various little groups trying to find their way to a common point. And this is when the characters finally begin to converge upon each other. This is chapter 11. It's called Judgment. It's sort of like the tip of the roller coaster, where everybody sort of falls down the hill and into the places where they're going to be as they try to get themselves out of the abyss. So here we go. Flavia's anger crested as a stream of spirits marched forward to the being larger than life on the throne of skulls, a horned demon with a tail. The tail darted forward into the mass of souls and pulled one out, plucking it like heather from the ground, pronouncing a one-word sentence and casting the soul into a pit. The tail groped near them and encircled another, around another unfortunate. Gluttony, the creature said, and then threw the soul away. Before Flavia could register the motion, the tail darted in, wrapped around Pavan, and pulled him into the air. She paused. Again, that voice in her head. Leave him. Come to me. Flavia shouldn't care. Pavan was a distraction from her purpose, but she did care. Even if she decided to stay in hell, she'd promised him that she'd get him out. Flavia was not her father. She made good on her promises. Before the demon could pronounce Pavan's sentence, Flavia ran forward. She heard her name in the distance and glanced toward the sound, seeing Mark off to one side. Mark was here. Her temper burned bright inside of her. She'd rather Greg see her new powers, but Mark would do. She hoped he would be impressed. Demon, she shouted. Drop him! The demon's tail flung Pavan to the ground and hovered around Flavia like a hungry snake. You come to be judged, it said. No, Flavia announced. I am here to judge you. The giant tail wrapped around Flavia's ankles. The gem in her neck flashed like lightning. The demon's hands shielded its eyes, and Flavia grabbed the length of its tail. She could see the seams where she could tear, and she followed the lines, pulling the tail apart with a satisfying wet rip. Blood oozed over her hands, feeling warm and comforting. The demon's screams dissolved souls into smoke and mist. Flavia tossed the torn flesh and scales aside, grabbed another part of the tail, and exerted her new strength. The demon lurched forward and wrapped his arms around her, hugging her to his chest. She plunged her hands into his midsection. Anger, the demon pronounced. He would not let her go, so Flavia pulled her hands out, dropping gobs of gore on the ground underneath them. She laughed. Flavia placed her palms on either side of the demon's head. With thumb and forefinger, she plucked one of his eyeballs from its socket, but still, Minos relentlessly moved her to the end of the pit. She didn't care. She drove 2 fingers under the remaining eye. Minos pushed her away and tossed her into the air. She hung for a second, gazing down into darkness. Air rushed past her, and she plummeted into the pit. Terror penetrated Flavia's anger as she tumbled. She could find no purchase, nothing to grab to stop her fall. Spirits howled and screamed around her, and she screamed with them. For a moment, her sanity locked into place. What was she doing, challenging Minos? Rescuing Pavan was the right instinct, but this desire to attack, Flavia knew, was coming from hell itself. She had fought Minos, and she would have won if she'd had a little more time. Sanity slipped away like mercury. Since she had arrived here, Flavia felt alive in ways she had never felt before. Having powerful magic of her own to use made her want to use it. And why shouldn't she? She could crush anyone with her magic, take them on, all of them, remake the underworld in her image. First, she had to survive. Her hair flew out about her like a banshee's. Souls darted in and snagged her, cutting her. She grew her claws and sliced back. She was like a creature in the forest, angry, sharp. With a power to take blood, she cackled and trilled. She would make her way in this bold new world, destroying everything in her path. She was so much more powerful than a mere binder. Oh, she would set everyone straight. She would fight and claw and kick and scream, and everything would submit to her. The small voice in the back of her mind told her that this was madness, like her mother's, and she squashed that voice ruthlessly like a cockroach. She was so hungry for this, having been told she was unworthy for so long. She came to the end of her fall and smashed into the ground. Her legs snapped and an arm shattered, and she died for the first time. Then she stood and began to fight. Skip a little bit to a different point of view. Mark saw Flavia wasn't alone as she worked her way toward Minos, who towered over the lost shades of hell. Paris Galt followed close by her, his jacket missing, his shirt shredded. Flavia! Mark shouted. A hot wind blew nearby, making his coattails flap. Flavia! Flavia's skin flickered orange, her insides on fire. Mark ran through the ghosts around him, spirits dissipating and muttering as he took the quickest path he could. Minos wrapped his tail around Paris. Flavia shouted, and Paris was dropped on the ground, a man too stunned to move. Flavia walked toward the judge, her face twisted and uncanny. Mark's heart lurched. What was she thinking? Flavia stood in front of the judge of the damned. Mist broke into pieces around her. You come to be judged, said Minos to Flavia. Paris looked up, his eyebrows arched, his mouth open. Mark was as shocked as Paris looked. No, said Flavia, I am here to judge you. Oh, God, said Mark. Flavia had decided to fight Minos. Minos and Flavia fought in earnest as Flavia ripped the demon to pieces. Mark was frozen, the souls wandering through him, around him. What was she doing to Minos, and how could she be doing it? Her strength made it possible for her to rip through flesh and bone. The sharp snap of Minos' tail shuddered through Mark. Don't stand here. Do something. Help her. Mark snapped himself out of shock. There would be time to process Flavia's vicious power later. Minos scooped her up and walked toward the gaping maw, which led to the lower levels of the inferno. Right now, Mark had to save her from being cast into the pit. He could hear the rustle and whisper of shadows around him. He gathered them to focus his power, but instead of the reassuring magic he had always known, a jolt tingled through him, knocking him to the rocky ground. He convulsed, electrified. Fine. He would also process what had just happened to him later. He struggled to recapture his breath. Pushing himself up, he staggered toward Minos and Flavia. Minos cast Flavia into the pit. Flavia's screams reached Mark as she hung in the air, and she fell. Mark reached his hands toward, as if at this distance that could do any good. No. Mark had failed Flavia. Minos was a torn corpse, one eyeball dangling down his cheek. His segmented tail dragging behind him, squinting at Paris with his remaining good eye. Suicide, pronounced Minos. Mark would not watch another soul cast into the pit. No! Stop! No! Mark stepped in front of Paris. Please, no. We aren't supposed to be here. It's a mistake. Please don't. Klareon, said Paris. She's gone. Run, said Mark. Run now. I can't. Run or you will be cast into the pit. Run. Paris backed away as Minos grabbed Mark's arm and studied him. Demon binder, said Minos. His eye crept back into its socket, the torn pieces of his tail rolling back to him and connecting with a sucking sound. Mark tasted vomit in the back of his throat. Was there a level for him after all? Mark braced himself as he amassed shadows again, trying to raise enough of them to hurt the judge. The resulting jolt crossed from him to Minos, and an explosion threw Mark backwards into the mass of gray spirits. As Mark slammed to the ground and spirits scattered, Minos' tail snaked around Paris's neck and cast him into the pit. No, Mark shouted. Minos stalked forward. Demon binder. Mark scrambled backwards. He couldn't use his powers, that much was clear. Minos' tail loomed over his head, the demon looking like a scorpion ready to sting. Mark braced, curling upon himself, closing his eyes. Get away from him! Diana stood in front of Mark, the lights of her rosary flashing. Minos backed away, hand shielding his face. Alexander helped Mark to his feet. Are you hurt? He asked. I can stand, said Mark, but I can't use the shadows. Minos stared at Diana. You are not allowed here. These men are under my protection, she said. I invoke the age-old pact of my family with St. Joan. You cannot harm those under my protection. The woman of your desire gets more and more interesting, said Alexander. What does she plan to do? Stare him down for an eternity? Mark stepped forward. Alexander grabbed his arms. Let her worry about him. Let's get you out of harm's way. Flavia, she gulped too. We saw all of it. I'm sorry, Mark. Truly sorry. A rumble shook the ground, and the two of them fell. Diana's light flared toward Minos, but Minos caught it in his hand and threw the energy back. Mark watched as Diana's spell became a fountain around her, subsuming her. No, Mark shouted. No! Adrenaline pushed him forward to Minos. No, don't go, said Alexander. Don't. Alexander grabbed him again, but Mark brushed him away. The spot where Diana had been was scorched. Mark boiled. How could you? Said Mark. She was innocent. Mark fell to his knees. She was innocent. She was not mine to judge, said Minos, but I sent her away. In your kind, there is always the potential for sin, and there is always suitable judgment. Broken magic be damned. He reached out for the spirits around him. Bring him back! Alexander stepped beside Mark. Your Honor, said Alexander, my friend is upset, but he too is innocent. Minos looked through Mark at Alexander. Sodomy. That's a horrible word, said Alexander, but yes, if I let you take me, will you send him to her? I will take you both, said Minos. Minos grabbed Mark around the waist and with a whip of his tail threw him into the pit. So, a happy little story like that.
Intense.
Right? Right? And there's still one character that's out there having horrible things done to him, but you know.
It's when it happens when you go into Dante's Inferno, right?
I guess so. But I promise you it doesn't, you know, I could say, well, that's the end of the book, but it's not. And I promise you it does get a little better, for sure. It's certainly not one of those books where everybody just gets beat on
constantly.
All the time, right?
So just wanted to ask everybody, if you have questions for Kath, please throw them in the chat. We'll be happy to answer those. I've got a few more, but we'd love to have some audience questions, or and we'll be happy to answer those. So in addition to writing the Klareon Scrolls series, you have a series for middle grade, and I know we have at least one librarian, a middle school librarian, on the call or on the meeting tonight.
Awesome.
And then you're working on the Kindle Vella series. So please tell us more about these books or these two series that you're working on. Love to learn more.
Okay, so the Abigail Wrath Versus series is a series of books for middle grade kids about a young woman, a 13-year-old girl, whose parents are monster hunters. They live in a world where they go out and they take care of kind of the relations between the human and the monster community. Abby's also been raised on a steady diet of her father's B movies, because he's also a B movie actor. He is Reginald Wrath, Vampire Slayer, with great apologies to Peter Cushing. And Abby at first believes that all of the vampire action in the first book is like her father's movies. So when she finds out that an old high school friend turned vampire of her friend Vince's parents are kind of stalking Vince, she decides Vince and she have to go out and slay the vampire Ned. And chaos ensues. But Abby learns a lot in the first book about how you get along with monsters, and what's allowed and what's not allowed. And she's kind of fun to write because she's kind of a sassy, voicey character. The second book is Abby meeting her crush. It's called Abigail Wrath Vs Mad Science. And it's about mad science. So it integrates a lot of the movie tropes from Frankenstein movies. It's a pretty good time. I'm currently working on the third one, which is Abigail Wrath versus the Mummy's Hand and the Rest of the Mummy 2, which is a project that I plan to have out this year, where Abby gets to kind of take a tour of all of the mummy mythos. And then for a Christmas special next year, I'm doing one that isn't a Universal Monster book, Abigail Wrath versus the Krampus, because I wanted to write a Christmas book. So they're short, little, fun, voicey books. Kids like them, adults like them. It's a good time.
I did like the sneak peek that you gave of the third book.
Yeah,
this year. That was hilarious because her friends get involved.
Right.
In this, which is always means more fun.
Right. And Abby's friends are kind of this interesting mix of capable, normal kids and monster kids. Right. So, I can't give away anything about the first book, but she picks up at least, one vampire in that book. So, well, actually two in a way, but one hangs out with her group of friends. So that's kind of fun. Now, the Kindle Vella series is a bit of a departure. It's not in the horror realm at all. It's a high fantasy series based on fairy courts and what would happen if a couple of runaway fairies in exile came to the mortal world. Turns out that this isn't exactly only their idea, and several fairies have been coming to the mortal world. Plus, there's a group of fairies who made an exodus out of the fairy lands because they wanted to not be servile to the fairies. So there's a group of trolls who live up in Decorah and kind of do all of the troll things in that area. And if you've been to Decorah, it's the perfect place for a whole bunch of trolls and Norwegian folklore characters. So it's a serial, which means it's written in about 2,000 to 3,000 word chunks, depending on the week. I just put one up that was a 5,000 word chunk because it was a big background of one of the supporting characters. But you get a little bit of installment of that twice a month about the adventures of Aaronmere, who is the actual real heir to the throne, but really wants nothing to do with it. Also a knight who is sworn not to kill, so that's an extra thing she has to negotiate. And her friend Magdalene, who's very keen to put Aaronmere on the throne and who is a Chronos caster, which means she travels in time and so forth. And then there are all sorts of other interesting characters. There's Grant the Troll, and there's a bunch of hungry fays who like going to demolition derbies, and dead fae who like having Dickensian parties with lots of cobwebs, and it's full of fairy stuff. So I don't know when it's going to end because, you know, it's a serial. I keep trying to throw stuff at it. Could I use another 50,000 words to resolve what I've done so far? At least. So it's probably going to be around for a bit. And what's interesting about the serial is, okay, so the Klareon books are really researched and really plotted and really revised. You know, you've got that level of historical research and all that good stuff. The Abby books do write fast, but they're revised, and they have lots of little pieces of trivia in them. So, you know, they work best. The serial I'm making up as I go along. There is no master plan.
It's almost like improv.
It is. And, you know, back, I was mentioning the gods of fan fiction earlier. Back when I first graduated with my PhD in 2001, I was really worried about my ability to write fiction at all. Because after you go to grad school for a while and you read all of these articles that are really exciting about writing, not this kind of writing, but, you know, composition, and you kind of feel like the creativity is just gone. So I actually took up with some fan fiction people for a while and wrote Harry Potter fan fiction before J.K. Rowling was such a controversial character. And so, you know, I really enjoyed doing that. And I actually wrote a serial during that time. And I loved the audience interaction, the forward march, and the improv. And so when Kindle Vella came out, I thought that would be fun to try to recapture some aspects of that. Regrettably, you don't leave comments in Kindle Vella. No. But still, it's something, right? It's something. Awesome. So yeah, I'm having a lot of fun doing that.
So we do have an audience question. Dennis Lynch asks, do you set things in warm Mediterranean climes to escape Iowa's winter weather?
Wow. It depends on what warm Mediterranean clime you're thinking of. You know, I used to think that was a definite direction I was going to go in. Now, I don't know. The world is a really crazy place now. And I think I'm just going to leave it at that. But we certainly do want to visit tropical climes from time to time. And I could see us doing that in the future. If you should hang out your shingle and let us know where you are.
So what are some of your favorite books? Are there any new authors or books you're particularly excited about that you think we should pick up?
I totally have a really good recommendation. I kind of like knowing so many writers, I do get occasionally the chance to look at books before other people do. It's like having the best secret library in the world, right?
Yeah.
And you probably get a little of this too.
Because and you probably suffer from the same thing I do. You get those, you read them, you're really excited, and there's nobody to be excited about it with you.
Yeah, exactly. And in a few short months, I'm going to be super excited about this one. People are going to start reading it, and they're going to be super excited about this one too. It's called The Embroidered Book, and it's by Canadian author Kate Hartfield. And that is exactly like it sounds like, Heartfield. It's coming out in Britain first because Harper Voyager UK picked it up first, and then it's coming out in the United States. The Embroidered Book is the magical Marie Antoinette book. It's what if Maria Carolina and Marie Antoinette, the sisters who were married and, you know, rule around Europe at that time of revolution, what if they had magic spells and were involved with magic? Oh, it's super good. It's amazingly painstakingly researched. The characterizations are great. The magic is great. It's such a wonderful book. And Kate is such a wonderful author. She won the Aurora Award, which is like the Canadian Hugo, for her first novel, Armed in Her Fashion. She usually writes kind of medieval stuff, so this is a real departure for her. But definitely pick that up if you can. I'm just super excited about that. Now, in the indie world, I'm super excited about another this huge book that's coming out in pieces. It's actually a serial, but then as she puts it out in the serial, after she's done with a particular part, she releases it as a book. The entire project is called Prima Materia, and it's by an author called L.S. Johnson. And what we call it is Vampire War and Peace. It's this huge sweeping cast of vampire characters as they go through the ages. Like there's a novella that's set in the Florence of Lorenzo Medici, which is just wonderful. And now we're looking at kind of traipsing around Europe in the 18th century, all of the wonderful things that happened there, and it's gruesome. It's really a horror novel. It's super bloody. I mean, she can't mention the word spoon without writing about blood. I mean, she's just a really gore-inspired author, right? But at the same time, the characters are very interesting and intriguing. So I can recommend that one.
Awesome. And Kate's book, I just looked out. Kate's book comes out just before Memorial Day. So if anybody's looking for something to read over Memorial Day weekend, I'm
gonna suggest my book group do it in the Science Fiction Book Club, and the next chance I get to pick it when it's out, because it's just wonderful. We could do this all day, but
That's the two right now popped to mind. I know I can do the same. Whenever everybody asks, do you have any book recommendations? Like, how much time do you have?
yeah. Well, as a book shop owner, especially, right?
Yes.
But yeah, when I used to do the podcast, when we had the unreliable narrators, I was always reading new books. And I knew exactly what was coming out. But I had to go back and really look this time, and I thought we're gonna have time for maybe a couple.
Yeah.
I should mention Beulah too, but I don't have time.
Michelle wants to know which authors inspired you to write.
Oh, good question. So, actually, I'm kind of classically trained. So when I was a kid, I was that kid who would go to the library and I would pick out like a young adult book or a science fiction book or a fantasy book, more contemporary. And then I would pick out a deep and serious, big, fat, thick book, like, and I'll be taking Don Quixote home. And I'll be taking Bleak House home. I was that kid. I was like, even when I was young. So for me, a lot of my inspirations come from some of those older authors, right? I'm going to say, if I had to pick one of those dudes, Alexandre Dumas is like my guy. The Three Musketeers, Count of Monte Cristo. I love that stuff. And the Klareon stuff is really indicative of that. It's that sort of bastardization of actual history to fit your paradigm, and super overly dramatic melodrama. Hopefully not as overdone as some of Dumas' work, but still, it's there. And one of my projects in the future that I really hope to do is actually do a magical retelling of the Count of Monte Cristo. That's something I want to do down the line. So certainly that. At the same time, some of the science fiction imagists really struck me. I am a huge fan of Peter Beagles. For me, Peter Beagles' best book is A Fine and Private Place. Of course, you can't name anything but amazing, glowing things about The Last Unicorn. Mm-hmm. The wit and vivacity of Jane Austen's dialogue, I aspire to that. For someone who wrote in her time frame, when you watch Jane Austen being made into current productions, that dialogue usually directly is hers, and it's that good that it lasts now, right? I was inspired as a young college student by the Mists of Avalon. That's another one of those texts like Rawlings texts, which have now become problematic because of the creator. But I remember feeling strongly that you could write a book that said something about the state of being a woman in several historical settings, and that one really inspired me as well. So those are just a few.
That's not great picks, though.
Yeah, I know, but when you read so much, it's just like, after we get off this thing, I'm going to go, oh, and that one. And
I had somebody ask me recently what fictional character am I most like, and I had to go ask my husband because I couldn't, there's just so many that came to mind, so I had to go ask him.
I'm curious, which fictional character you like?
He picked the main character in Hench, because the young woman in that book is she is a hench person for the villains in the in the city. And in the first bit of the book, she's injured and she's off of work. And while she's off work, she starts gathering data and putting it into a spreadsheet and realizes that the heroes are actually causing more problems in the city than the villains.
Oh,
and so she starts to utilize that data.
It does sound like you.
Yeah, utilize that data to come up with scenarios to manipulate the superheroes, and eventually becomes a villain in her own right. So she understands the way to perfectly utilize a spreadsheet and a project plan.
So I don't know whether you're a super villain or not, but in all those other aspects, I think that does sound like you.
Well, after the first season of Daredevil on Netflix, when Wilson Fisk had a backup plan for his backup plan, I said that a good project manager is just one bad day away from becoming the next supervillain.
That's right. That's right. So when we were talking about characters that, seemed like you, I was at a women's writer retreat in Vegas. Vegas is a surprisingly good place to write. It is. During the day. Yeah. So somebody told me about Rainbow Rowell's book, Fangirl.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And the main character is named Kath, and she writes in that universe as Harry Potter fan fiction.
Yep.
So I immediately went out and got it, and I thought, oh, very spooky. But it was a lovely book, and it's
a lot of fun.
It's a great book about like the young college experience. Yeah, for sure.
And mental health. There's some good messages in there about how to deal with that and how families cope with those situations.
I guess that's probably another book people should read. Yeah.
So awesome. Just checking to see if there's any more last minute questions. Please drop them in the chat. We'd love to hear from you, and thank you for joining us tonight. My one last question is, what is one thing you wish people would ask you about? And would you like to share that thing with us?
Ooh. Okay. So I'm going to get heavy for a moment. Just a moment. All right. So today I was like reading an article about the governor's State of the Union speech last night. And, I'm not going to go off on like all of the things, but there was one piece that reminded me kind of where I come from. There was a conversation about books being banned in schools, right? Back in 1993, I used to be a high school teacher at a small Iowa town, and I was teaching a book called The Chocolate War. And if you know Robert Cormier's The Chocolate War, you know that book is an oft-questioned book. It was a great book. It filled out the 7th grade curriculum that I was teaching marvelously. It was modern. It gave the kids a chance to ask certain questions. It really was a nice book, a good fit. Some really conservative religious parents in the community did not appreciate that book being taught. And the year before, we actually had to go through a committee where the book was reviewed and okayed, and we actually had to send out permission slips for the kids to read the book and have alternative books in place. And, it was a big mess. But in the end, the community could not overcome the noisier parents who decided that this was not a book they wanted in the school. And the good news for me is I ended up out here teaching at Kirkwood, So for me, all of that controversy actually made my life better because I left that small community and ta-da-ta-da. But I found that, it's like, well, that's never gone away, but now it's becoming more mainstream, right? And Iowa used to be considered like this amazing haven of education. And now these challenges are becoming more mainstream. And so I guess, if people wanted to ever talk to me about like the value of a good education and why letting your kids choose to read where they choose to read, and having a good librarian stand up for the rights of books and having a community stand up for the rights of teachers to teach certain books, I'd be happy to talk about that.
Awesome. I will keep that in mind because we often have teachers come in very frustrated with those conversations with the administration.
Honestly, I wouldn't have had that. This would have been a totally different answer yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
But when you sent me that list of questions, I was like, oh, kind of got to talk about that today.
Mm-hmm.
Also, as a result of that whole thing, I got this wonderful letter from Robert Cormier.
Oh, nice.
And, that was good. But there are people out there who feel like you do, teachers and librarians, about good books, and there are ways you can stand up for that in your community, and parents too. I think it's more important in some ways for parents to stand up and support those people.
Awesome. Great. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us about your books or about your writing? Any other appearances you have coming up? Maybe there's people online that are nearby some of the other places you're going to be appearing, since we were talking about that earlier.
Right. So on the 22nd, if you're in the Des Moines area, Doug Engstrom, author of Corporate Gunslinger, which is a different kind of dystopia than Dante's Inferno, believe me, and myself are going to be reading at Beaverdale Books. We're going to be reading on the 22nd at 2 o'clock, refreshments, book reading, that kind of thing. We're also going to be, I guess, on Culture Buzz in Des Moines on the radio on the 19th to preceding that. And then I'm trying to get together a gig at Kirkwood, but I don't know if coronavirus is going to blow that one out of the water or not. I will be back online reading on the Story Hour on, I think it's Wednesday, March 14th. And then I believe I'll be putting in some author guest time at Demicon this year. That's not 100% confirmed yet, but it's likely to happen. So that's in May. So a few appearances here and there.
Yeah. And Demicon's usually right around Memorial Day weekend, isn't it?
It's usually the first weekend in May.
Yep.
WisCon, which I will also be at because it's like the best one of the best cons in the universe, is Memorial Day weekend.
Got it. I knew there was one that fell that weekend. It was sort of in the Midwest.
It's sort of the feminist science fiction convention, and it's really a unique perspective on science fiction fantasy.
If I wasn't already headed to Chicago the following weekend, I'd probably look into that one.
You should look into that in the future. Plus, it's in Madison. That's a great place. And just because it's a feminist science fiction convention doesn't mean that people of all gender orientations are not welcome. It's just that it has that feminist lean.
Awesome. Great. Well, I want to thank you for your time today, Kath. It's always a joy to talk to you, and we look forward to future conversations, having in-person events with you, and promoting your books and having them on our shelves. I always love sharing your books with people. So.
Well, thanks, Terry. It's always great to have a chance to talk to you too. And thank you guys at Swamp Fox for all of the wonderful stuff that you do for the community and that you do for local authors as well as authors that have a bit of a farther reach.
We enjoy it. And I think with the one thing we've learned from the whole pandemic is that virtual events is a great way to connect with people. Even if we can't meet in person, it offers some more flexibility and ability from people from all over to join us. So I love that aspect of it too. But I do miss the in-person stuff.
Oh yeah, I hear you.
But thank you everyone for joining us tonight. You can always rewatch this on our Facebook page, facebook.com/SwampFoxBookstore. We look forward to having you in the store or purchase books online from us at swampfoxbookstore.com. Have a good night.
Thanks, everyone.